The dust-filled wind carried her scent before he ever saw her face, the delicate hint of rose water clashing with the harsh Wyoming Territory wilderness as Olivia Pearson stumbled from the stagecoach, her trembling hands clutching a worn leather satchel like it contained her very soul. The year was 1876, and like so many who found themselves in the rugged frontier town of Clearwater Junction, she looked ready to disappear. Mason Quincy watched her from the shadowed overhang of the livery stable, his weathered Stetson pulled low against the setting sun. At 32, he'd learned to read people better than tracks in the dirt. This woman was running from something or someone. "New arrival," Samuel Jenkins, the stable master, asked as he handed Mason the reins to his dappled gray mare. "Appears so." Mason kept his voice low, watching as the woman glanced nervously up and down the single dusty street before hurrying toward the town's only boarding house. "Pretty thing," Samuel commented. "Though I reckon she won't last a week out here. City folk never do." Mason disagreed but kept his thoughts to himself. There was something about her, a determined set to her jaw beneath the fear, the purposeful way she moved despite her obvious exhaustion. This wasn't some delicate flower blown off course. This was a woman with intentions. 3 days passed before their paths crossed properly. Mason had been delivering mail and supplies from the larger settlement of Fort Laramie, a job he'd taken up after selling his cattle ranch 2 years prior. Riding into town, he spotted her outside the general store, struggling with parcels while attempting to maintain her dignity in a place where refined manners meant little. "Allow me, madam," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion and reaching for the precarious stack of packages in her arms. She startled, nearly dropping everything. Up close, her eyes were the deep blue of mountain lakes, wide with a wariness that spoke volumes. "Thank you, but I'm perfectly capable," she replied, her accent betraying Eastern origins, Boston, perhaps, or Philadelphia. Never suggested otherwise. Mason tipped his hat. "Just offering a hand, Mason Quincy, at your service." She hesitated before answering. "Olivia Pearson." The pause before her surname didn't escape his notice. "New to Clearwater?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Yes." "I've taken a position teaching at the schoolhouse." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know we had enough children for a proper school. 12 enrolled so far." A small, genuine smile briefly transformed her face. "It's a start," he nodded, noting how quickly she'd found purpose here. "Well then, welcome to our humble settlement, Miss Pearson, though I suspect you'll find it quite different from whatever city you left behind." Her smile vanished like water on hot stone. "That's rather the point, Mr. Quincy." Before he could respond, she gathered her parcels closer and nodded politely. "Thank you again for your offer. Good day." Mason watched her walk away, her spine straight as a fence post despite the weight she carried both physical and otherwise. She intrigued him in a way no woman had since his wife died 4 years ago. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple structure that had previously served as a meeting hall before the town council decided education might attract more families to settle. Mason found himself riding past it frequently in the coming weeks, sometimes catching glimpses of Olivia through the windows, gesturing animatedly as she taught the handful of frontier children. It was almost a month before circumstance forced their paths to cross again. A late spring snowstorm swept through the territory, catching everyone by surprise. Mason had been returning from a supply run when he spotted a lone figure trudging through the thickening snow, head bowed against the wind. Without hesitation, he urged his horse forward, recognizing Olivia's blue cloak. "Miss Pearson," he called above the wind. "This storm's turning dangerous." She looked up, snowflakes clinging to her lashes. "Mr. Quincy, I'm just heading back to the boarding house." "That's a mile in deteriorating conditions." "Please," he extended his hand, "let me take you." For a moment he thought she'd refuse, then the wind gusted fiercely, nearly knocking her sideways. "Very well," she conceded with surprising grace. She accepted his help, mounting behind him. Mason felt her hesitation before her arms encircled his waist, maintaining as much distance as possible while still holding on. "Been teaching late?" he asked as they rode slowly through the worsening weather. "Yes, the Tompkins children needed extra help with their arithmetic." "You've made quite an impression on this town. Even old Walter Hayes is singing your praises, and he once claimed education was a waste of daylight." He felt rather than heard her soft laugh. Mr. Hayes simply needed someone to listen to his stories about the Mexican War. "I find a little attention goes a long way with the reluctant. Is that how you convince the children to learn?" "Children naturally want to learn, Mr. Quincy. It's adults who need convincing that knowledge won't somehow harm them." The wisdom in her words struck him. They rode in companionable silence until reaching the boarding house, where lights glowed warmly through frosted windows. As he helped her dismount, their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary. In the lantern light, he noticed a faint scar along her temple, partially hidden by her hair. "Thank you," she said softly, quickly tucking the wayward strand back into place when she noticed his gaze. "My pleasure, Miss Pearson." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps you join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening to properly welcome you to Clearwater." Alarm flickered across her features before she composed herself. "That's very kind, but I'm afraid I must decline. Good night, Mr. Quincy." She disappeared inside before he could respond, leaving him puzzled by her reaction. Most unmarried women in frontier towns welcomed such invitations, if only for the companionship. Olivia Pearson, it seemed, preferred solitude or feared something else entirely. The spring thaw brought with it a flurry of activity in Clearwater Junction. New settlers arrived, the promise of land and opportunity drawing them westward despite the hardships. Mason kept busy with his deliveries, occasionally exchanging pleasantries with Olivia when their paths crossed, but respecting her obvious desire for distance. One afternoon in late April, he was loading supplies at the general store when Harold Wilson, the town gossip who doubled as telegraph operator, approached with the smug expression that meant fresh news. "Got a wire from back east," Harold announced loudly enough for several bystanders to hear. "Someone's looking for a woman matching our new schoolteacher's description." Mason's hands stilled on the crate he was lifting. "Is that so? Philadelphia gentleman named Charles Pearson says his wife Olivia disappeared with family heirlooms after attacking him, offering a substantial reward." A cold sensation settled in Mason's stomach. "And you're spreading this why, Harold?" the smaller man bristled. "People have a right to know if there's a criminal in our midst. Besides, that reward would go far in these parts." Mason straightened to his full height, which considerably exceeded Harold's. "Far as I can tell, the only crime being committed is you potentially slandering a respected member of this community based on a telegraph that could be from anyone claiming anything. But her name is none of your concern unless Sheriff Davies says otherwise." Mason's voice hardened. "Have you taken this to him?" Harold shuffled uncomfortably. "Not yet, but then I suggest you do that before running your mouth further. And Harold," Mason leaned closer, "if I hear you've been spreading tales that harm Miss Pearson's standing, you and I will have a serious conversation." The threat, though subtle, was clear. Harold muttered something under his breath but slunk away. Mason finished loading his wagon, his mind racing. He needed to warn Olivia, but approaching her directly might only confirm suspicions. That evening, he rode to the small cabin he'd built on his remaining 10 acres of land outside town. As he tended to his few livestock, the sound of an approaching horse broke the twilight quiet. Drawing his revolver, Mason stepped cautiously onto his porch. Sheriff Davies's familiar silhouette appeared in the fading light. "Evening, Mason," the older man called. "Put that iron away, just need a word." Mason holstered his weapon and motioned the sheriff inside. They'd been friends since Mason first arrived in the territory 8 years prior, young and full of dreams about building a cattle empire. "I assume Harold came to you," Mason said once they were seated with coffee. "He did." Sheriff Davies sighed. Also showed me the telegraph. It's troubling. Troubling that a woman might have fled an abusive husband. Mason's tone was sharper than intended. Troubling that I don't know which version of events is true. The sheriff fixed him with a stern look. You've taken quite an interest in our schoolteacher. Mason felt his jaw tighten. I respect her work. The town needed someone like her. MMM. The sheriff sipped his coffee. Well, I'll be sending a reply asking for more details before taking any action. But Mason, his expression grew serious, if Miss Pearson is indeed running from the law, I'll have no choice but to detain her until the matter's resolved. And if she's running from a violent husband using the law to reclaim his property, which is exactly what a wife was under Eastern statutes. Sheriff Davies set down his cup. Then I'd hope someone might help her establish the truth of her situation. He stood to leave, adding pointedly, someone who perhaps understands what it means to seek a fresh start out here. After the sheriff departed, Mason spent a restless night weighing his options. By morning, he'd made his decision. The schoolhouse was empty when he arrived, the children having been dismissed for the day. Olivia sat at her desk, head bent over papers, the afternoon sun highlighting auburn tints in her dark hair. She looked up at his entrance, surprise quickly giving way to wariness. Mr. Quincy, what brings you here? He removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. Miss Pearson, I'm afraid there's something you should know. As concisely as possible, he explained about the telegraph. With each word, the color drained from her face until she sat white-knuckled and rigid before him. How much time do I have? She asked when he finished, her voice remarkably steady. A few days, perhaps a week before the sheriff receives a response. Mason took a step closer. But running isn't your only option, isn't it? Bitter laughter escaped her. You don't understand what I'm facing. Then help me understand. He pulled a chair beside her desk, close but not crowding. I want to help you, Olivia. The use of her given name seemed to break something in her composure. She pressed trembling fingers to her lips before speaking. Charles Pearson is indeed my husband, she began softly. A respected businessman in Philadelphia with powerful connections and a sterling reputation in public, in private. Her hand unconsciously touched the scar at her temple. He hurt you, Mason stated rather than asked, for 3 years. At first it was just criticism, controlling behavior. Then came the first blow when dinner wasn't to his liking. She spoke matter-of-factly as though discussing someone else's life. Each time he apologized, promised it wouldn't happen again. Each time it got worse. Did you try seeking help? From whom? The police. They dined at our table monthly. His friends at the club, the minister who told me to be more obedient. Her eyes flashed with remembered helplessness. When I finally gathered courage to tell my father, he reminded me that I had made vows before God. Mason felt rage building inside him at the injustice. And the heirlooms he claims you stole, my mother's jewelry, the only thing she left me when she died. Olivia's chin lifted defiantly. I sold 2 pieces to fund my escape. The rest he had already locked away as collateral for my good behavior. Did you attack him as he claims? She hesitated. The night I left, he caught me packing. He was drunk, violent. He said he'd rather see me dead than disgraced by leaving him. Her voice faltered. I pushed him away when he grabbed me and he fell against the fireplace grate. I feared I might have killed him. I ran without looking back. Mason absorbed her story, recognizing the truth in it. Sheriff Davies is a fair man if we explain no. She shook her head emphatically. Charles will deny everything. He'll have doctors testify to my fragile mental state, friends swear to his upstanding character. I've seen him destroy others who crossed him. This isn't Philadelphia, Mason reminded her gently. Out here, people judge by what they see, not by someone's word from 1,000 miles away. And what do they see, Mr. Quincy? A newcomer they barely know versus a telegraph promising reward money during hard times. Tears welled in her eyes. I should never have stayed so long. I knew better. You stayed because you found purpose here. Mason hesitated, then carefully covered her hand with his. And perhaps because running gets tiresome after a while, their eyes met, and something passed between them: recognition, understanding. Two people who had each, in their own way, been trying to outrun pain. "I don't have answers yet," he told her, "but I'm asking you not to run. Not yet. Give me time to help." She stared at their joined hands. "Why would you risk yourself for me? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said simply. After a long moment, she nodded once, the barest acceptance of his offer. It wasn't trust, not fully, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Mason met with Sheriff Davies and proposed a plan. The sheriff would respond to the telegraph, requesting more specific information and documentation of the alleged crimes. This would buy time, potentially weeks, considering the distance involved. Meanwhile, Mason discreetly contacted a former Army comrade who'd become a lawyer in Denver, requesting information about a woman's legal rights regarding divorce and protection from an abusive husband in the territories. 5 days later, a reply came from Philadelphia. Charles Pearson would be traveling west himself to retrieve his disturbed wife and the valuable property she had stolen. He expected full cooperation from local law enforcement. "This complicates matters," Sheriff Davies admitted when he showed Mason the telegram. "Once he arrives, I'll have to hear him out." "All I ask is that you hear her side too," Mason replied. As the threat of Charles Pearson's arrival loomed, Mason noticed Olivia withdrawing further from the community she'd begun to embrace. She kept to herself after school hours, and dark circles appeared beneath her eyes. He found himself riding past the boarding house late at night, irrationally needing to assure himself she hadn't fled. One evening in early May, he spotted her silhouette on the boarding house porch, staring out at the mountains in the fading light. "Evening, Miss Pearson," he called softly as he approached. She startled slightly. "Mr. Quincy, you're out late. Just checking on things." He climbed the steps, maintaining a respectful distance. "May I join you?" At her nod, he settled beside her on the bench, both of them gazing at the twilight landscape. "I received a letter today," she said after a while, "from the school board in Silver Creek. They're offering a teaching position for the fall term." Mason felt his heart sink. "That's over 100 miles north." "Yes, far enough that he might not follow." She twisted her hands in her lap. "It seems the sensible choice." "Is it what you want, what I want?" She gave a hollow laugh. "I stopped believing what I wanted mattered long ago, Mr. Quincy." "Mason," he corrected gently, "and it matters to me." She turned to study his face in the gathering darkness. Why have you championed my cause when others would have collected the reward or simply looked away?" The question deserved honesty. "My wife, Rebecca, died 4 years ago, childbed fever after delivering our stillborn son. The familiar ache of loss had dulled over time but never vanished entirely. Before that, we had a good life, not perfect but built on mutual respect and care." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "When I see how your husband treated you, something precious discarded and damaged, it feels like a personal affront to everything I believe about how a man should behave. But more than that," he met her gaze directly, "I admire your courage. Your determination to build a new life despite everything. You make me sound braver than I am," she whispered. "Most days I'm terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's continuing despite it." Something shifted in her expression, then a softening, a recognition. She reached out tentatively and touched his weathered hand with her slender fingers. "Thank you, Mason." They sat in companionable silence as stars appeared overhead, neither mentioning the warmth where their hands remained connected. 2 weeks later, word reached Clearwater Junction that Charles Pearson had arrived in Cheyenne and would be continuing to their settlement within days. The news spread quickly through town, curiosity and speculation following in its wake. Mason found Olivia packing her few belongings when he came to the boarding house. "You're leaving," he stated flatly from the doorway of her room. "I have to." She continued, folding a dress with trembling hands. "I cannot face him. You won't face him alone." Mason stepped inside, gently taking the garment from her. I received a letter from my lawyer friend in Denver. Hope flickered across her face. And Wyoming Territory has some of the most progressive laws regarding women's rights. You can file for divorce citing cruelty, and your testimony would be considered valid evidence. He placed the dress aside. Furthermore, as you've established residence here, local jurisdiction would apply. Charles will never agree to a divorce. The scandal alone would enrage him. He may have no choice, especially if there are witnesses to his true character. Olivia shook her head. You don't understand. He's charming, persuasive. People believe what he tells them. Then we'll make sure they see the truth before he speaks. Mason took her hands. Olivia, running means you'll always be looking over your shoulder. Is that the life you want? Of course not. But then stand your ground. I'll be beside you every step. She searched his face. Why risk yourself this way? He knew in that moment that what had begun as sympathy had grown into something deeper. Because I care what happens to you, more than I expected to care for anyone again. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Slowly, Olivia raised a hand to his cheek, her touch feather light. I'm afraid, she confessed, not just of Charles but of trusting anyone again. I understand. He covered her hand with his own. I only ask that you give us a chance to prove not all men are like him. After a long moment she nodded. Very well, I'll stay. Charles Pearson arrived in Clearwater Junction 2 days later, making a grand entrance at the hotel in a fine Eastern suit that looked ridiculous against the frontier backdrop. He immediately called upon Sheriff Davies, presenting papers declaring Olivia his legal wife and accusing her of theft and assault. The sheriff, true to his word, refused to take immediate action without hearing Olivia's testimony. A public hearing was scheduled for the following day. That evening, Mason visited Olivia at the boarding house, finding her pale but resolute. I've arranged for several women to accompany you tomorrow, he told her. Mrs. Weaver from the Mercantile, Mrs. Jenkins, and Widow Burke. You won't stand alone. Gratitude shone in her eyes. And you. I'll be there. He hesitated before adding, there's something else. I had Sarah Jenkins examine the town record of marriages and births from Philadelphia. Charles Pearson was married before you. Olivia's eyes widened. What? That's impossible. He told me his first wife died of consumption years before we met. According to official records, he divorced her after she was committed to an asylum. Mason watched her absorb this. The petition claimed she was mentally unstable and prone to violent outbursts and delusions. The same claims he's making about me, she whispered, understanding dawning. A pattern. Exactly. Sarah's brother is a doctor in Boston. He's wiring information about the first Mrs. Pearson if she's still in that asylum. It would establish his character, Olivia finished, hope kindling in her expression. The hearing the next day drew nearly every resident of Clearwater Junction. The town hall overflowed as Charles Pearson presented his case, playing the part of concerned husband with practiced charm. My wife suffers from delusions, he told the assembled crowd with an expression of pained concern. Her mother experienced similar afflictions before her passing. I've only ever tried to protect Olivia, even from herself. He described how she had allegedly stolen family heirlooms worth considerable sums and attacked him unprovoked before fleeing. Several times during his testimony, he cast sorrowful glances at Olivia, who sat rigid between Mrs. Weaver and Widow Burke. When it was Olivia's turn to speak, she rose with quiet dignity. In a clear voice that gained strength with each word, she recounted the abuse she had suffered, showing the visible scar at her temple and describing others hidden beneath her clothing. I did not steal what was already mine, my mother's jewelry, left specifically to me in her will. Her gaze never wavered. And I did not attack my husband except in defense of my life when he threatened to kill me rather than allow me to leave, Charles scoffed loudly. Preposterous lies from a disturbed mind, Mr. Pearson, Sheriff Davies warned. You'll have your chance to respond. Before that moment came, however, Mason stood. Sheriff, with your permission, I'd like to present evidence regarding Mr. Pearson's character. Despite Charles's protests, the sheriff allowed it. Mason produced the telegrams confirming Charles's previous marriage and the commitment of his first wife under similar accusations of mental instability. Furthermore, Mason continued, I have statements from 3 Philadelphia servants formerly employed in the Pearson household, attesting to witnessing violence against Mrs. Pearson and being dismissed for attempting to assist her. Murmurs spread through the crowd as Charles's charming facade began to crack. When he attempted to interrupt again, his voice carried a hardness that contradicted his cultivated image. These are fabrications. This cowboy has clearly been seduced by my wife's feminine wiles, he sneered. I demand she be returned to my custody immediately along with my property. Your property, Mason echoed. Is that how you view your wife, Mr. Pearson, as something you own? The law recognizes my rights. Charles stood, color rising in his face. This frontier backwater cannot override legal precedent. Perhaps not in Philadelphia, Sheriff Davies interjected calmly. But in Wyoming Territory, the law recognizes Mrs. Pearson's right to petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty, and her right to retain personal property such as jewelry inherited from her mother. Charles's composure finally shattered. This is absurd. I'll not be dictated to by uneducated savages. Olivia, come here this instant. When she didn't move, he lunged toward her, his hand raised. Before anyone else could react, Mason intercepted him, catching his wrist in mid-air. That, Mason said quietly, was unwise. The assembled townspeople had seen enough. Several men moved to restrain Charles, whose threats and curses only confirmed everything Olivia had claimed about his true nature. I believe we've reached a decision, Sheriff Davies announced. Charles Pearson, you're free to return east, but Mrs. Pearson remains under the protection of this community and territorial law. Any attempt to remove her by force will result in your arrest. The look of pure hatred Charles cast at Olivia sent chills through the room. This isn't over, he spat before being escorted out. And indeed, it wasn't not quite. Charles remained in town for 3 more days, alternating between attempts to charm influential citizens and thinly veiled threats against Olivia. When these tactics failed, he departed for Cheyenne, vowing legal action. But the territorial courts upheld the local decision, and by late summer, Olivia was granted a divorce, one of the first women in Wyoming Territory to successfully petition on grounds of cruelty with her testimony accepted as sufficient evidence. Through it all, Mason remained steadfast beside her, his quiet support never wavering. As autumn painted the surrounding mountains with gold and crimson, Olivia found him at his small ranch outside town, mending a fence in the crisp afternoon air. The last of the papers arrived today, she called as she approached. It's finally over, he straightened, a smile warming his features. Congratulations. It's strange, she admitted, coming to stand beside him. I've been someone's daughter, someone's wife, now I'm just me. Nothing just about it. He set aside his tools. You're the woman who stood her ground when running would have been easier, the woman who's changed how this town thinks about education, the woman who's made me believe in second chances. Olivia's breath caught at the open affection in his eyes. Over the months, their friendship had deepened, but both had been careful not to rush toward something more while her past remained unsettled. I received another letter from Silver Creek, she said. They still want me for their school. His expression remained steady, though something flickered in his gaze. Is that what you want? No, she took a step closer. I've done enough running. Clearwater is my home now. I'm glad to hear it. His voice roughened slightly. The town wouldn't be the same without you. Just the town. She asked softly. Mason gently took her hands in his. Olivia, I've respected the boundaries you needed while fighting your battles, but I won't pretend my feelings are merely those of friendship, nor are mine. Her eyes shone with emotions too long suppressed. I never expected to trust a man again, let alone love, he supplied when she faltered. Yes. The admission felt both terrifying and liberating, Though I'm still learning what healthy love looks like. Then let's learn together. He drew her closer. I can promise you this, you'll never need to run again, not from me, not from anyone. I believe you. And she did with a certainty that had been hard-won through shared struggle and unwavering support. When he kissed her, it was gentle, asking rather than demanding. Olivia felt something long broken inside her begin to heal as she returned his embrace. That winter, they married in the same town hall where Olivia had first stood her ground against the past. Their wedding was a simple affair, attended by nearly everyone in Clearwater Junction people who had become not just neighbors but allies and friends. By spring, they had expanded Mason's small ranch house, adding rooms for the family they hoped to build and a dedicated space for Olivia to tutor children who needed extra help beyond school hours. On warm evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Sometimes they spoke of their previous lives, Mason of Rebecca and the child he'd lost, Olivia of her gradual entrapment in a gilded cage. More often, they discussed plans for their future. Expanding the ranch, establishing a proper library for the town, perhaps one day traveling to see the ocean Olivia missed from her childhood. One such evening, as twilight deepened around them, Mason noticed Olivia watching him with a peculiar smile. "What are you thinking?" he asked, covering her hand with his. "That I spent so long running from the worst of my past, I never imagined I'd find the best of my future." She leaned against his shoulder. "For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be." "And where is that?" he asked, though he knew the answer. She looked up at their home, then out at the vast Wyoming landscape that had once seemed so alien and was now beloved, before finally meeting his gaze. "Home," Olivia said simply. "I'm home."